Welcome to Hospitality Talks. Today, we'll look at the most resilient sector in American hospitality, extended stay. The extended stay market is currently the darling of U.S. hospitality industry. It continues to outperform traditional hotels due to its lower overhead and consistent demand for blended traveler, those who combine business and leisure. Whether you're a developer tracking the latest construction pipeline and cap rates, or a traveler looking for additional space to do your work, extended stay is the right product. We will review the high level data driving this sector while exploring the guest expectations and amenities that keep occupancy high and how the industry is rising to meet these expectations. I'm your host, Avid Butt. It's time to welcome our guest, Greg Juceam. Greg serves as a president and CEO of Extended Stay America, the pioneer in leading brand family in the mid-priced extended stay hotel segment. ESA comprises 700 hotels, including roughly 500 company-owned and managed properties. Prior to ESA, Greg was president and chief operating officer of G6 Hospitality. He also served as CEO of BRE Hotels and Resorts, a hospitality real estate platform with 10 billion in asset value. He's a longtime board member of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, founding co-chairman of AHLA's Extended Stay Hotel Committee, and past chair of the Board of Trustees of AHLA Foundation. Thank you for taking the time to join this conversation.
Nice to be here with you.
Well, Greg, first and foremost, congratulations on leading an organization where you have just celebrated 30th anniversary, managing a large portfolio of around 700 hotels around the country. A big chunk of it is owned by the organization or one of your affiliates. Tell us about the future of ESA. What are you focused on today?
Well, always great to be with you, Abid. Thank you for the invitation. Many of your audience hopefully know, is a 30-plus-year-old company. We were founded in Charlotte. We weren't founded in Charlotte, but we reside in Charlotte. We were founded in 1995 in Florida. As you mentioned, we own and manage quite a bit of our estate, about 70% of our close to 700 hotels. Many don't know we're a vertically integrated company, so we're a brand. Everybody knows we're a brand. We have a franchising division, which is about 8 years old, so we're fairly young in terms of franchising. But we have a large ownership piece. It's a real estate investment trust, about 500 hotels, and of course, we also have a management company that manages for that REIT and for other owners. So we're constantly balancing between priorities and those four different divisions of the company, the three different entities. And it's been going great. We've been growing franchise now 170 hotels in just these 8 years, and certainly going to be growing that in the future. But are constantly also focused on our most important thing, which is not growth, it's property performance. As an operator and as an asset manager for most of your career, that it doesn't matter what brand you are or where you're located, it always comes down to property performance. And so that's job number one, whether we own and manage a hotel, third party manage it, or franchise it. So quality and cash flow and property performance ultimately will in the end lead to growth.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Now, Greg, over the last 4 or 5 years, ESA now has a family of brands, including suites and premier suites. How are you ensuring that these brands don't cannibalize each other and still capturing different tiers in the mid-price market?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. The first thing that we wanted to do as we developed brands, and I can go back and we could talk about the development of the brands and why we did them, because may be true that not everybody knows. But in essence, today we have three brands that are each roughly about $20 apart in price point. Half of our guests stay for a month or more. So if you have a $20 differential in your rate and a guest is staying for a month, you could do the math. I mean, basically we're seeing a very material difference in the monthly rent, so to speak, that a guest will pay. And what we wanted to do when we created these two brands was to make sure that they began first with the letters ESA, or Extended Stay America, because the number one thing that we've built over 3 decades is incredible guest awareness. We have a 90% awareness that leads in our research, leads the industry by a long shot in terms of real extended stay guests knowing who we are and what we do. So we've created a brand family all under ESA with different products and services that, in essence, based on the guest point of view, will lead them to about a $20 price differential. And when you're talking about five or six or $700 a month in rent, essentially you have a different guest pool, and that's the way that we don't cannibalize. Different products, different services at different price points, all under ESA, very efficient to market. Let the guests know what the different price points are. They can research what the product and services are and then make the right choice for them at that particular booking.
Thank you. Greg, ESA is one of maybe a handful, if that many companies that not only is a brand owner, they own the brick and mortar, the real estate component, whereas a lot of the other brands have divested themselves off of the ownership and they are predominantly an operator or a brand owner. Talk a little bit about how does that help ESA? What are the challenges you're up against? Some of the tensions that exist between the owners that you operate hotels for and or franchise the brand for.
I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, there's a number of differentiators about ESA. I mean, I always rattle off three or four when I get asked this question. But the fourth one that I end with, which is what you allude to, I think is the most important thing, in that most brand competitors these days do not own any real estate anymore. They're what's called, it's called asset light. And Extended Stay America is anything but asset light. As I mentioned, we are the largest REIT and still are very much big believers in real estate and in managing hotels. Why is that important for people to know? Why is that important for prospective franchisees? It means because we understand what it's like to be an owner, because we are an owner ourselves. We are managing hotels day to day. So we don't have to sympathize with owners, which many brands do. We can empathize with them because we're living all of their realities face to face. We know what it's like when interest rates go up. We know what it's like negotiating insurance premiums. We know what it's like fighting through supply chain. And so when you have skin in the game, as we do, it gives you a different perspective as a franchisor. We have to balance the guest needs with the owner's realities. And that makes us pragmatic because whatever standards we're going to put out for franchise hotels, we ourselves have to do, and we have to do it hundreds of times over. And so we often will do pilots in our owned and managed estate. If we have something that we think guests are going to like, or we think there's a program that might have ROI, we will test it ourselves on our own dime. And if it works out, then we can introduce it to our franchise hotels, which is not what they get in most other asset light brands that have to experiment on the dime of the franchisees. So I think it's a major differentiator that we continue to own and manage real estate. We have sold some of it because we didn't want to own and manage 90% of our estate. But we continue and will continue to be a large owner and manager because I think it separates us from others and it creates predictability for a franchisee when they recognize that any changes you're making for them, you have to as well. And that in turn means that you often make fewer changes than other brands might otherwise make.
Keeping on the same topic, there are much, much, much larger brand operators that claim on loyalty vis-a-vis points. Now, ESA is a much smaller entity, far more nimble organization. Tell me, what challenges does that present in attracting the guests and also dealing with the owners that are looking to put a flag on their building?
Right. So, today, the way I like to think about it is not to start with what brands will call their brand contribution. What I like to do is to look at it by what is not brand contribution, which for the most part are the OTAs, the online travel distributors. At ESA, and the numbers change from year to year, but generally speaking, we get roughly about 18% of our business through OTAs. There are many brands that are out there, whether they advertise it or not, through the industry that get 25, even 35% of the business into their hotels from OTAs. And so we start by saying we don't, that's the highest cost for a reservation to the owner, the operator, is through the OTA. So we're beginning from a place where we bring less business to owners and to franchisees from OTAs to begin with. The rest of that business, you ask about points and miles, and this has been long debated through the years, not just around ESA, but around the economy and mid-scale brands in general. Most guests that stay in economy, and I would say the lower end of mid-scale lodging properties, are not frequent travelers. This has been documented. They'll stay on a road trip maybe twice a year, in some cases 3 times a year. This to me is akin to, I have all these restaurant apps on my phone, the quick service restaurants, most of which I'll go to twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. And it's great that I'm accumulating points or miles, or I might someday get a free appetizer, but I'm not staying with the frequency enough for it to be worth my while. And so what you see with economy and mid-scale guests, we know from 3 decades of doing this, those miles and points aren't nearly as valuable to them as frequent travelers. What they want is they want instant discounts. They want money that they can put in their pocket on that very stay. And so rather than having a miles and points program and pretending that we're driving 70% of the guests to the hotel, essentially what we're giving them is if they are a member of our perks program, which is free to sign up, they can get a discount on their very first stay, $4 to $5 a night. If they're staying for 90 nights or more, potentially, that's real money back in their pocket. And it doesn't cost us a lot to have that kind of program in place. Whereas the biggest brands that you mentioned are spending tens of millions of dollars on these miles and points programs. And these points and miles are stacking up on their balance sheet, perhaps never to be redeemed. So I think our approach, while it's been debated and others may disagree, has worked really, really well for us without burdening owners with that, extra cost and the fees that come along with having a miles and points.
Let's talk a little bit about the demand for Q1. A wider statistic that I've read that year over year it was essentially flat, maybe slight decline, but it was essentially flat. Now, generally speaking, extended stay market continues to grow, and in the at about 8.5 CAGR is the growth that has been talked about. Occupancies in extended stay typically are at a premium of 10 plus points. Talk a bit about what the first quarter was like for you. What do you see for the rest of the year in light of the economic environment that we are operating in today?
Right. So for Q1, the star reports are now out, or whatever your vendor of choice is. And I feel pretty good about first where the industry is. We have a broad growth ultimately in RevPAR. Of course, luxury is leading the way, has been the case for some time now. We know that, those with the higher end of the perhaps equity chain are more flush than they were, and they're continuing to spend and grow even at ADRs in the luxury segment. Specific to extended stay lodging, I appreciate the point that you brought up. For ESA, our FDDs were released last month. And what we reported was that we run north of 76% occupancy, all told, for our roughly 700 hotels. You compare that to the economy segment overall, which was only 52%. And in many cases, the overall industry, including all segments, is in the low 60%. So the demand for extended stay hotels, including ESA, I would say particularly at ESA, continues to be incredibly stable, very robust. And Q1, as was the case last year, there wasn't really growth. It was pretty much continually high occupancy, but we gave back a little bit on rate. As we approached Q1, we began to see inversion. And now, really, through 4 months of the year, we actually have RevPAR growth again. We're beginning to see occupancy growth, particularly, and rate growth is coming back. And I think as we talk more probably on this call about what the rest of the year looks like, I think there's a greater opportunity for not just the industry, but for economy hotels and for extended stay America to continue to push on rate through the balance of the year.
So, has the ESA typical guest profile changed in any way in the last 2 years? There has been a rise in the blended travel, the business and leisure travel combined. So, has that in any way helped ESA? Have you seen a change in guest profile? Is there an amenity that you might have thought was very important to the guests a couple of years ago, but it's no longer relevant?
Yeah, I suppose, unpacking that, there's a few different things. I think that you've asked whether the demographic has changed, and I would say slightly on the margins. You mentioned like the bleisure trend, and I would add maybe the digital nomad trend where people are testing markets because they're less tethered to an office. That has sort of ebbed and flowed as office occupancy has started to come back, but there's more of that than we used to have. But I would say generally for extended stay hotels and particularly for ESA, we haven't had material changes in our mix. What we saw coming out of COVID was that residential demand was incredibly strong. And when I say residential demand, what I'm talking about are not people perhaps that are going to live with us for 3 years, but people that are uncertain about what they want to do next. Perhaps they want to move to a new market. Maybe they want to save and own a house, but the timing isn't right. Maybe they want to try a new place, on a seasonal basis, snowbirds and things like this. We began to see more and more demand for that. There's just not enough affordable housing in America. And when people are uncertain, they don't make permanent buying decisions. And so they rent things. And by and large, ESA is a rental business, right? Somebody is making a transitional housing decision. And so that has been very, very strong for us. We do leisure demand, but it's less than 20% of what we do, and that's come and gone over the years. But really, the biggest variable has been what is the B2B contribution, which is typically about a third of our business. And by B2B, I mean these are retail teams that are opening a new store, or a construction crew that is working on an infrastructure project, or a small business owner that is expanding into a market and needs to visit quite often to put an office in place. That has been ebbing and flowing really since.
Thank you. Greg, there are two major events in US FIFA World Cup that will bring some international travelers in, and there will be domestic travel as a result of that because soccer's popularity today is far higher than the last time when World Cup was in US. And also we are celebrating 250th anniversary. What can the industry do to encourage more travel? What are you seeing in your portfolio? Are there any positive trends?
Absolutely, there are positive trends. It's an amazing thing. We only turned 250 years old one time. We're thrilled to have FIFA World Cup in the US. There have been stories about maybe some softness in demand. I take all of that with a grain of salt. We're going to have 104 soccer matches in the United States from countries that travel far and wide. It's not going to be 104 Super Bowls, but even the most conservative estimate that I saw is that it will be equivalent to something like 10 Super Bowls. And Super Bowl's a big deal if you're owning and managing a hotel in that particular city. So 10 Super Bowls, even if it's not 104, I'll take that. And we're going to have to comp over this next year and this 250th. So I think all of that's very, very positive. You alluded to international travel being down, which is true. We, as a country, still have not hit the pre-pandemic heights for overseas international travel. Asian travel, for example, hasn't come back to the level that it was at. I think it's something that we need to do better at as a country. Obviously, there's all sorts of changes to how we administer the programs around immigration and visas. And obviously we have to protect the country in a lot of ways. But we need to get more. It's good for the whole industry. Even if ESA doesn't participate so much in transient business, it's good for the whole industry to get international travel back. And I'd be remiss not to mention funding for Brand USA, which is the destination organization that markets the United States inbound travel overseas, was largely defunded, which to me made no sense because it's paid for by visa fees from international travels. It's not paid for largely by federal taxpayers. And it's supported with co-matching funds from corporations. And so if we're able to get Brand USA funded again, hopefully, if we can continue to market the country as the amazing destination as it is, and get pre-pandemic international travel back, on top of these amazing tailwinds we have that I've mentioned previous on this call, we're going to have an industry that's really humming in a couple of years.
I'm sure that's music to a lot of owners' ears because our industry is very, very complicated. I'm gonna stay on the hotel performance. You alluded earlier that your focus these days have been on how each of the hotels performs. Now, there are lots of cost pressures that each of the hotel is experiencing, whether it's property taxes, labor costs rise, utility increases, you name it. There are tons of things that are unfavorable to the hotel operations. ESA and extended stay generally works well because of higher margin and low cost. People stay longer. Talk a little bit about that. How are you mitigating some of those costs, and how have you been able to reduce the risk for different hotels?
Well, you mentioned labor costs as obviously it's the largest expense that we all have in the hotel industry. And one of the ways that you mitigate minimum wage increases and harmful labor mandates impact on the business is to have a streamlined model to begin with. So I always will answer that question by starting saying that structurally, economy hotels and extended stay hotels in particular have a much more predictable and stable model. In our case, if you're cleaning a room once a week, or in some of our brands, we clean once every other week, and you're selling the room on a weekly basis, you're cleaning that room once or twice over the course of 2 weeks, whereas a transient hotel may have to clean it 8, 10, or 12 times over the course of 2 weeks. And so, it's harder for the bigger hotels to weather all of these expenses, but we're not immune to it. And asset managers these days have a tough job. They're scrutinizing line by line. And so I think, around doing this, it's having scale helps. We can negotiate procurement arrangements in a way that smaller companies can't. That's not just around products, that's around insurance, and that's around healthcare programs, and that's around, a lot of the operating expenses as well. And so we're able to do that. And because we're doing it ourselves as an owner and a manager, we can also pass along the tips and tricks to franchise owners because we're in the business day to day. One of the things that I'll mention that we did at ESA that I think is very, very important was we created a brand in 2022 called Extended Stay America Select Suites. It is a pure economy extended stay brand. It's a room with a kitchen, and there's a laundry facility in the lobby. But other than that, there's no other frills. We're not doing breakfast and fitness rooms and pools and all those things. And what it did for us was it enabled us to move some hotels where perhaps we had overscoped the product and services, or perhaps in a tertiary market where a franchisee wants to build an extended stay hotel, but they couldn't make it pencil because some of the other brands had higher costs. It enabled us to tap into that market. And in just 3.5 years, that brand for us is now 175 hotels, in part because we moved some of our mid-scale brand hotels that weren't really performing as well as some of the others down into a segment that was more appropriate for the guests. We still gave them incredibly affordable rates, but it lowered the cost model for us. And some of our franchisees elected to do the same, or have elected to transition into ESA now because we have that brand that's out there. So I think adding that tier in 2022, when the inflation really started to take off, was another important pivot that we made that I think is resonating not just with franchisees, but even with us as owners and managers ourselves.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Look, we'll stay on topic with the workforce. Our industry has been plagued with high turnover. Generally speaking, in somewhere between 70 to 80%. Any things that you are working on in developing a culture where ESA associates feel more valued versus just a paycheck? Don't get me wrong, paycheck is very important. We all have obligations to meet, so paycheck is important. But what else can we do to attract and retain people? What can be done to train the future leaders so that the industry has bench strength that is required?
Yeah, I think it's an important question. And by the way, thank goodness we're not in 2021 and 2022 anymore when we were at 130, 140%. We couldn't even find workers to keep our hotels open and operating. And so I'd be remiss, as stressful as 70 or 80% may feel, we've been through worse. At ESA now, we've been 5 years in a row. I'm very proud of this. We're 5 years in a row of consecutive retention improvement, voluntary retention. I've never had a 5 year win streak, so I'm probably jinxing it by talking about it now. But certainly our industry is not the easiest industry to work in. It has amazing things that I'll talk about. But if you don't want to be on your feet all day, or you're not built to interact with the public, it's not going to be for everybody. But there are so many amazing things about our industry. It's starting with the fact that anybody can do it if you have a great attitude and a willingness to serve the public. You don't need English as your first language. You don't need a college degree, even though I got one and probably shouldn't have wasted my money. Um, right? I mean, you could be in a technical school. You could be a high school graduate. You could be any number of ways. You could be an immigrant that has studied an adjacent industry. No 2 days are the same. The career pathing opportunities are amazing because there's dozens of departments in a big hotel. And even if you want to work off of the hotel, you can go to a management company or be an asset manager or work at a brand or be an advisor around our ecosystem. So there's a lot of amazing things about our industry. So what can we do? The first thing I think is not to get too far out of our lane. At COVID, we started playing around with gig economy, hiring people to work an hour here, an hour there. In the bigger hotels, that may have helped. In the smaller hotels, it created more problems than it was worth. So I've come down to two things. Number one, take care of the people that you have. Yes, pay them fairly, but treat them with respect and provide them with training and career development. Because in this industry, career development opportunities are attainable for anybody that wants them. So those are like the oldie but goodie concepts. And then secondly, I think as an industry, not just at ESA, we just need to constantly be talking about the career pathing opportunities to the next generation. You can do anything you want in our industry. And I'm inspired every day at ESA. You ask about ESA. It's amazing what we have here. I've never seen it in any other company where we have 66% of our general managers are women. I've never seen that anywhere else in any other big management company. The amount of them that have worked their way up from housekeepers or desk agents is unbelievable. We've got 2/3 of our team is a diverse workforce. And the reason is because people came in and it didn't matter what they knew. We trained them. And we have a core value here to grow our talent from within. We only have 4 core values. I know a lot of people talk about that, and many do that very well. But for us, it's one of 4 cultural things that we constantly do. And it's given opportunities for people to rise up in hotels and, yes, within the company as well. And so I come back to those 2 things. I come back to our core value. And one last secret that I'll give that I hesitate giving a little bit, but I will because we're old friends. We do have a retention bonus opportunity for our general managers and district managers, which you've worked in large branded convention hotels. Some of those general managers have that kind of an opportunity, but I've never seen it in mid-scale and economy. And we brought that concept to ESA. And I think it's a big part of the reason why our turnover numbers have been so low and continually declining over these last 5 years.
That's amazing. How long has that program been in place, Greg? And have you seen a noticeable decline since you introduced that program?
Yes, absolutely we have. We put it into place in 2022. And, what I found, I guess this really shouldn't have been shocking to me and probably isn't shocking to you, but we learn every day. When you have a stable general manager and a stable district manager, that trickles down to the rest of the operation. Because if it's a great general manager, people are going to want to stay with him or her. And so what we've seen is our field line staff has had material increases in retention because our general managers and our district managers have stayed in place. And that to us has been, I think, the biggest part of the secret to the success for 5 years of consecutive turnover reduction.
We'll shift gears a little bit. Just a more broader question. What worries you the most as you are operating in today's business environment?
Yeah, there's always something to be worried about. I suppose we live in uncertain times, and I guess if you were to pin me down to one thing that's worrying me, I guess it's how higher interest rates have constricted hotel investment activity, right? And so at ESA, this isn't the end of the world for us because if new competition doesn't get built as a large owner, operator, franchisor, our existing hotels are going to continue to do very well. We're not necessarily loving all the new competition that could be coming down the road. But you and I have lived in times where interest rates were higher in our careers. But anybody who's been around for, say, 2 decades or less is used to a Fed funds rate in the 0 to 2% range. And so what's happening now at 5% is paralyzing to them. Many of these people are now investors in our industry. And it's causing them to maybe not do deals, maybe not put as much reinvestment in the capital for renovations or to invest more in technology or people. And it's really restraining the flow of investment activity in the industry. And I try to think industry first. And so I think that's the thing. We've begun to see it, moderation in interest rates. We'll see what happens going forward. But I think if interest rates moderate and we continue to see demand tailwinds, the next few years for the industry are going to be incredibly.
Okay. So staying on the business environment and for the industry at large, is there anything we can do as an industry on advocacy front, working with the elected officials, whether it's at the county level, city level, state, and of course at the federal level? What can we do to make sure that the elected officials understand this industry, they understand the challenges in this industry, and willing to support one of the largest industries that there is, largest industry, largest employers, community-based employer? What can we do collectively?
I love the question, and I'm smiling because as we're recording this, it's a week before the hotel industry with American Hotel Lodging Association goes to Capitol Hill to lobby on behalf of our industry to protect and advance, the amazing thing that hotels do. We have more than 2 million jobs that we support across the U.S. We have $900 billion of U.S. GDP annual impact. It's about 3.5% of our entire economy. Yet there are people, for either whether it's intentional or inadvertent, don't love our industry as much. And sometimes that can be local municipalities making, well-intended rules that impact the success of our hotels, which are really small businesses, right? We have 64,000 small businesses. You want to take the REITs out of that and say they don't qualify, fine. But then there's still 50,000, hotels that are owned by individual entrepreneurs. A major thing that most, those in Washington or state and local government don't know, that these are really small businesses with investors and owners that live in their communities, that are creating economic welfare, not just in the hotels, but in the community around it, at the entertainment venues and in the restaurants and in the transportation segment. What can we do? We have to fight much more broadly than we are today. I said we have 64,000 hotels, and then you got management companies and all sorts of others that are suppliers around the industry. We should have thousands of people in Capitol Hill next week instead of hundreds, right? Every company should be sending a dozen people, as ESA is, to this event. And that's just the federal advocacy. I think, equally at state and local levels, it's very, very important, even for an individual general manager, even at an economy hotel, even if they only have 4 or 5 other staff, get to know your fire marshal, get to know your chief of police, get to know your elected officials, because when it comes time for them to think about legislating in your community, if they don't know you, they're not going to ask. And this can be created on a Monday and be passed on a Friday. So, it's state, it's local, and it's federal. We have all a big army of millions of people, and we just need to do better. And that, in partnership with whether it's American Hotel Lodging Association or the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, or even state CEOs of their particular lodging community, just getting out there one way or the other and being part of the conversation instead of sitting in our four walls, I think is so important for the future of the industry. We'll do that next week in Washington, and I hope others heed this call to action.
Well, amazing. Look, it is all about building relationships. And if any industry, our industry is all about relationships, all about people. So it should not be any different for the elected officials that we reach out and make sure they understand what our business is about. Our business is very complicated. Having spent all the time that I have in this industry, I'm still learning. So, somebody who's from outside the industry, the differences between brand and owner and the management company, it is rather difficult to understand. Let's shift gears to technology, and no conversation in this day and age will be complete without talking about technology. The buzzword is AI, and it is changing our world. Lots of things are being simplified. Any initiatives that ESA is evaluating where it would help optimize the hotel operations and take out the friction in guest journey?
Yeah. So when the company was acquired back in 2021, we did a full technology assessment. ESA had been operating incredibly well, but you're always looking for what you can do better. And technology is one of those things that we probably don't even talk about enough in our industry. But most every system that we had at the time, every one of them needed to be upgraded in some way. And we've done that. We completely rescaled the entire technology stack, everything from property management system and revenue systems to accounting systems and purchasing, everything. And yes, AI is coming, and I suppose I'll get to that. So we started with a 4-year plan to essentially redo the entire tech stack, stuff that normally takes a dozen years to do, but we did it in 4 years, and it's amazing. And the whole idea, to your point, is to reduce friction, not just for guests. We love reducing friction for guests, but to reduce friction for our associates, for our franchisees, and for everybody in our ecosystem, all of our suppliers. And so we've done that in a lot of different ways. We've also been very focused on keeping things simple. As an economy brand, we can get carried away with trying to have all the newest bells and whistles, but the reality of the situation is a lot of that stuff, not only is it expensive to build and to maintain, but those costs have to get passed on to owners. And so we've been very thoughtful about what we've done, and at the same time have made almost every process better, whether it's labor scheduling in our management company, where general manager will get a warning if he or she isn't matching the labor to the demand, or might be putting in an overtime schedule by accident. It'll notify them, whether that's our general managers getting real-time information from our Tableau dashboards that tell them what they need to focus on. So rather than looking at 50 reports and trying to figure it out, the red blinking lights tell them exactly where to go. And now on to AI, which our entire industry and every industry, frankly, it's going to be transformative, but it is going to take time and a lot of investment to get there. I think everybody wants to do it overnight. But I would say the two things that we're focused on at ESA at the moment is, before you ever get involved with an LLM and before you ever get to sort of the advanced strategies, you need to make sure your data is great, because the LLMs and other technology platforms are going to scrape your data. And you got to make sure that everything on your hotels and their locations and what they offer and how you're serving guests is known. And, even just the old days of putting on a website that you have a pool is great, but with the LLMs, you got to tell them what you don't have too. So they're very clear that this hotel does not have a pool, because it needs to serve that information up to guests. So getting the data right and educating the LLMs for, I think, us and for everybody is table stakes. And then you can get to the more advanced stuff, which we're doing in a lot of ways at ESA. I won't bore you with it, but the biggest project we're tackling right now is in our call center and our contact center, where we're using agentic AI, developing a program right now that'll take a minute to finish. That ultimately will ensure that there's no drop calls because the computers are on 24/7. That every guest will get the service they want and the information they need very quickly through an agentic AI agent. So we're on that, and I would say probably a dozen other projects right now. And it's all going to be coming, and it's going to be transformative for our business. But it will take a minute, I think, before our industry catches up to figure out where the dust is going to settle on some of these LLMs.
Well, look, this technology hopefully will make us far more efficient and far more resilient to the ups and downs. Because to your point, these computers are on 24/7. So for simple answers where the desk is not getting bombarded with calls to get more towels or whatever the case might be, that can be rechanneled, and the front desk person is actually doing the higher value tasks that need to be done. So I'm a big fan of technology. I think it still has a bit of ways to go before it can be everyday use, but there are lots and lots and lots of use cases that we can look at to learn from. But it is going to be transformative. Greg, great conversation. One last question, and I promise you I won't keep you longer. You have frequently credited your mentors for your career trajectory and successes that you have had. Truly the case for me. I'm very thankful that I've had the opportunity to work with some wonderful people all around the world. What is one piece of advice that you find yourself repeating most often to the next generation of hospitality leaders coming out of schools or people that are looking at this industry as a career? What should they do? What they should not do?
I love your question. I think, someday when all of this is said and done, folks like you and I, and we look back on, what contribution hopefully we've made to this industry, it's not going to be about P&Ls and other things. It's going to be about helping others to come up in the industry and succeed and to sort of pay it forward. And I guess the one piece of advice I would give is really no different than what I would have said even 20 years ago, which is for those looking to come up, to be very intentional about putting yourself in jobs and in companies that allow you to learn. When I graduated college, I had a chance to work at a big name firm. There was a smaller firm that came in. I went with the smaller firm, much to the chagrin of my friends and family who didn't really understand the move, because that particular CEO said, my goal here is to train you all, and I'm going to give you opportunities to learn and to fail that some of the big properties weren't. I had a chance once to work at Waldorf Astoria. I was very excited for that job, but I had another job offer competing, and it was for an airport Holiday Inn. And boy, I was looking forward to the Waldorf. The property's amazing, and it would have been an experience. But the general manager of that airport Holiday Inn told me, I'm going to take you under my wing, and I'm going to teach you what none of your textbooks ever could. Those things are very important. So keep skill building, make yourself more experienced. If you want to move up, it'll make you more marketable. Don't take the job for the company name or the size or the ego. The best learning opportunities might be in the smaller places, and just keep acquiring those skills that are going to help you be more successful in the long run or make you more available and ready for the next step if you so choose to take it.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much. And coming from somebody with your pedigree, it means a lot. Our industry is wonderful. I obviously love it much the same way as you do, and hope that the younger generation will continue to look at this industry favorably because of all the opportunity that it provides. Greg, thank you so much for joining me. It has been amazing conversation. I look forward to having you back on the platform before too long to continue to talk about the industry that we all love. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me. The pleasure was all mine.